Welcome to the special regular council meeting, Tuesday, November 15th, 2022. We'll begin with roll call.
Councilmember Babcock. Councilmember Brookover.
Here.
Councilmember Watson.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Gregg.
Here.
Mayor Bacon.
Present. I'll look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Item 1.3, approval of the minutes and closed session minutes, regular council meeting, November 1, 2022.
I move we approve the minutes and the closed session minutes from November 1st, 2022.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All written communication received by council is posted to the online agenda packet. That's all communication received before 4 p.m. Next up, communication from the audience. First communication on Art Space, Holbrook.
Good evening, Council. Mayor Bacon, Mayor Pro Tem, and the rest of Council. I'm Eleanor Holbrook. I live here in East Lansing. I'm a real estate broker. I've served on the Planning Commission in the past. I've served on the Economic Development Commission when the Marriott came in, so it's a long time ago. And I've also served on the Arts Commission. I'm very pleased to say that I've served as one of the core members of the Art Space Feasibility Group when Art Space came in and looked at East Lansing to see whether or not we could sustain a nonprofit housing development just for artists. So I was very happy to see it on the agenda because I can tell from the agenda that housing is a big issue for this council. And art space, lofts, and live work studios are just that, and they're specifically for artists. So we had tremendous response from the community. What we learned from the feasibility study was that the community does indeed support art space, that local artists support art space, young artists, older artists, musicians, all kinds of artists, poets. We looked at an array of different artists. Also finance. So we have, through all of the focus groups we had, and there were right around 150 people involved all the way around, including the community. So the result was the feasibility study that says that, yes, East Lansing is ready for an art space, that we are indeed the city of the arts, and that we can possibly sustain a development of that type along with other developments. So we looked at sites too, and Mayor Pro Tem Jessie Gregg was also on the core group, and so she knows exactly how much work we put into it. And it was when COVID had just come along, so we really had to look hard for places where we could meet. Newton Lofts very generously gave us some rooms that were open and airy and had patios and so on, so that we could meet. So the feasibility study is on your agenda for tonight for you to receive it. And what I would like to say, and I have the support of others whom I worked with, that I'd love to see you move to the second phase, which is the arts market study, which will do a much deeper examination of how many artists live here who would use lofts of that type, specifically look at financing of all kinds, public financing, private financing, donations, and so on, to put together a development of this type. So I urge you to do that, and I hope that everyone who's received the information that is on the agenda here from Art Space, that you'll take a good look at it. Also in your packet are support letters from 11 individuals who represent the community, who live here, some of our elected officials, as well as people like Roy Saper, who's got a destination art gallery here, Robert Trezise, who represents LEAP. So you'll be looking at those letters too. So I hope we can move ahead with this and kind of put it together along with the timing and looking at Valley Court Park and also the other housing developments that you might be looking at. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Cahill?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here also to support Art Space, and I live in Avondale, which was built by Capital Area Housing Partnership, actually the group that's existed before them. And I'd also like to support the feasibility study in Phase 2. I wrote a letter of support last March 17th to the City Council and encourage support of Art Space in whatever way you can as soon as possible. And I'm also a member of the East Lansing Housing Commission and very active in the community and actually county commissioner right now. So thank you. Anything I could do to help. Bye.
Thank you. Carol?
Good evening. My name is Liam A. Carroll, and I'm here as a resident, a voter, a taxpayer, an activist for safe living and long-term financial stability in downtown East Lansing. And the violence continues. It was about this same time, at the end of this council meeting on November 1st, that a mere 3 minutes away, a person was being robbed at gunpoint. Had the criminals drove another 3 minutes to the northeast, they could have very well been in the parking lot out front as people from this meeting were walking out. I'm very pleased that we have the partnership with MSU and the usual mutual aid agreement organizations. Why? MSU and the neighboring police officers do not have to answer to the Overstep Committee. It is a shame that the city has hobbled the East Lansing Police Department so badly that the city now must resort to calling outside neighborhoods or outside departments which are to come to town to help our department because they are not hobbled by the same committee. It's a shame that our hardworking police officers can no longer do the job that they wanted to do, and that outside agencies must be called to do it. I'm not sure what they can do without the fear of Monday morning quarterbacking. Speaking of Mayor Bacon's comments, you said we were going to win. When? I don't want to win the game and have a 29-1 season against Team Criminal. Speaking of your comments, Mayor Bacon, you rambled on in a bunch of media sound bites blaming things from 50 years ago, saying it's everywhere. Where were you when the tide started rolling? We are at halftime, and other non-committal snippets for the media. You did say one thing that makes sense to me. Mayor Bacon, you said history is being made now. I could not agree with you more. Unfortunately and sadly, it is not the history that we'll be proud of in the generations to come. Unless the city makes a pivot and makes a commitment to long-term public safety improvements, beginning with the uncuffing of the hardworking police officers on the streets of East Lansing who can genuinely chase the criminals from our neighborhoods and business districts, we will not be making the right history. You will not be making the right history. Nowhere in anything that I said did I mention race. Nowhere. Mayor Bacon, you brought race into it at the last meeting. Play back the video at 28 minutes and 35 seconds. You will see where you injected the image of, and I quote, black kids with guns, end quote, into the narrative. As a loving uncle of black nephews, I'm offended by your imagery of black kids with guns. And I would ask that you stop casting such damning light on my nephews. Councilmember Brookover, you attempted to make what you interpreted as implication of what I said. For starters, I believe your implications of what you believe were my implications were completely wrong. Replay the video at 13:10 if you wish to hear what I said without your implications attached. Additionally, outside of the implied contracts, which must meet a very specific set of unambiguous requirements, saying something is implied based upon your interpretation of understanding of what was said is merely your speculation. I think they teach that in the first year of law school. Nowhere did I say that the police walked away. You made that part of your statement. Councilmember Watson, you have stymied me. Somewhere, or somehow, you have used national issues that are out of control of anyone in the city or the state to attempt to hold hostage safety lighting in our city and risk sacrificing that much needed outside financial grant money. I agree with your feelings that you were dismissed. I think some would prefer that instead of voting against good things, if you want to draw attention to your causes.
30 seconds remaining.
That's an encouragement, thank you. Outside of if you want to draw attentions to your causes, maybe you could stage a silent protest and refuse to discuss or vote on anything until you no longer feel dismissed. There is power in your silence. On the video, at 1 minute or 1 hour, 8 minutes, Councilmember Watson, you stated, "I represent a different part of the city." It sounds to me like you're saying that you represent special interest groups. MSU has the right idea about lighting and cameras. In the past year alone, they have installed 300 new cameras, bringing their total to 2,000 cameras. I would ask anybody in their comments to tell me, and the residents at home, how many cameras East Lansing has installed in the past 12 months. Lastly, on a long-term city stability matter, what is the city government doing to remove the name of East Lansing from the eligible distressed areas list held by the state of Michigan? Besides some extra programming money, it is this list that the state watches under Public Act 436 of 2012 for emergency financial manager takeover of the local government. It's not the list we want to be on. My name is Liam A. Carroll. I am a resident voter, taxpayer, and activist for safe living and long-term financial stability in downtown East Lansing. I thank the viewers at home for their time and the members in the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone in the online queue?
There are no callers in the queue.
Next up, communication from Mayor and Council. Councilperson Brookover.
Nothing, thank you.
Councilperson Watson.
I just wanted to thank Clerk Schuster and everyone else that was involved with a great election day and the building up to a great election period. I understood that we had a large volume of people and a large number of ballots to tally, and just, appreciate your ongoing professionalism in your team's work. I guess I just want to remark on the remarks about the special interest. I live on a busy street surrounded by renters, and that was my reference. And I also wanted to say that, respectfully on people's different perspectives, and just as I appreciated what Mayor Bacon said last time we were here, respectfully, we see things differently, and, you have a point of view, and we have a point of view on things as well. It's good to hear feedback. And I'm grateful that MSU Police is a part of what we're doing in our downtown area, because if it wasn't for MSU's admittance of so many students, we wouldn't see such a huge increase of volume that we do see. And that has to be taken into consideration when the city of East Lansing, our downtown area, is the poppin' area that people want to come to. But when they cross over, it's City of East Lansing Police Department's problem, but it's really not our problem alone. And so I appreciate MSU PD being involved, and Chief seeing that, there was a good reason, and City Manager to involve them in these conversations and the work that we're trying to do. And that's all I got to say today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I also, apologies if I'm less legible tonight. All of my children are down with a cold, and I don't want to pass it off to any of you. So I've tested and retested. It's not COVID. We're just snotty. Anyway, I also wanted to echo Councilmember Watson's compliments to our clerk's office. I don't know if it's known outside of City Hall by our regular residents just what goes into these election cycles. We had people who worked 20 to 30-hour days that day. Our absentee ballot voter board is a sequestered board that enters a room and then cannot leave until the ballots are counted. They were here for more than 24 hours. Many of our regular staff left their other jobs to chip in and help with our lines of MSU students. And this is in spite of the fact that we were running remote clerks' offices on campus for over a month before the election. So I think that we've seen now a couple of cycles of this election same-day voter registration, and it's fairly obvious now that college towns specifically, ours obviously, but we were not alone in our lines and our same-day registrations. And so I'm going to be consulting with people who have more knowledge than I do about the election cycle and see if there's some sort of message that we can send to our state government about assistance needed for those heavy work days. I also want to just address two comments from our last speaker. MSU police do have an oversight committee. They've had an oversight committee since 2012. It is very active in terms of fielding commissioner complaints. It functions pretty much exactly the same way that ours do. Both of those commissions are completely independent of the police review process and have advisory duties only. We also have installed new cameras in the last 12 months. I can't tell you the number. But in downtown total, we have about 190, including the ones in our parking garages. And we use the footage from those on a pretty regular basis. So I think that's everything I have to say tonight.
Thank you. I just have to reiterate on the piece on the election group and being part of the election commission with myself, the clerk, and our city attorney, and just seeing the thoroughness and preparation leading up to the election, and to our staff and people you see on that side of the room that were here just all night. I also want to thank law enforcement and everyone that helped us to keep things in order, and specific shout out to Chad Connolly for helping us close the line out at the end of the night. People were at City Hall until I don't know what time the people got 11. I have no idea. I lost track of time between that and Michigan State, but in conjunction with that, Michigan State, East Lansing, that election, and including the Ann Arbor and other areas were mentioned, obviously it was national news, and it's kind of national history in its own way, and was mentioned on really any outlets, including financial outlets like Bloomberg and other places. I didn't anticipate seeing people talking about an election in East Lansing and the representation of young people and that kind of thing. So it was very impressive representation. To the discussion of the downtown, the law enforcement have the ability to enforce and are really unfettered in their ability to enforce anything downtown. The things that are going on, and I still commit to it, will be solved for and will be taken care of and that kind of thing. Those are more than sound bites. When I'm talking about people of color, it's exciting that you have people of color in your family. I have people who are white in my family, but I don't walk around in their skin. So that's a really bold statement to make regardless. And I don't know how you can say that's, I don't know, you can take that back and work on that. That's a bold statement. And as far as activity in the downtown, we have a lot of activity in downtown. We will report back with what law enforcement's doing, and they've taken multiple steps, and we'll take many more steps until we kind of corral everything that's going on and we understand the safety. And like I've said a million times, I have hundreds of kids. I coach. I work with Michigan State. I have at least, probably over the years that live in this area, 1,000 kids. So I do, I just won't equivocate with that, with my concern for, and my kids live here. So yes, it is concerning. It's disconcerting. I want the reputation of our area to be safe, but, from referencing history, we really are in it. You can't take a step back and then kind of try to negate everything else that's occurred all through the time and then go, oh, what's happening? But it's happening all over the country, or are we just ignoring the impact of what's going on television? You can't turn on your television without seeing the impact of gun violence in every way, shape, or form that's out there. And I was literally talking to a friend today from the elements of this outside of maybe what street crime or whatever you want to call it, and then the elements of mental health and other things that are going on. He was literally depicting to me today, so it's easier to get an actual gun than it is to get help if you're in crisis. What's the actual step you take? Like when there's a street crime or something going on, you call 911. What's the instantaneous step you take if you're in a crisis and considering doing something actually dangerous to yourself or to others? And you can't think and you don't know what the next move is. Most people don't even know what that next move is. And this was someone apolitical who was just kind of talking to me about that side of things. And I think many of these individuals, if it's gang or other related, that'll be dealt with from a criminal justice perspective. But a lot of the stuff that's taking place now is a lot of other stuff as well. So we've got to take this on many fronts, and I won't get us boxed in to considering everything is the exact same type of thing. Crime is taking place, but also senseless crime and senseless acts of violence are taking place as well that can't be explained away by street crime or other things along those lines. So we'll continue to work diligently. We'll continue to support law enforcement on all fronts, and the city's committed to making sure things work out. And this is way more than a soundbite. I have everything at stake here in East Lansing. So that's it. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to mention again the comments from council. Great appreciation to our clerk, Jennifer Schuster, the city clerk staff, the cadre of many city staff from all departments that helped out on election day throughout the night, overnight, and also, of course, our community election workers without whom we could not run an election. All of them were instrumental in running an election. It's a very difficult task in a university community with same-day voting. They did a great job. I think that we have to work with the state, as Mayor Pro Tem said, to think about what ways we can, a couple of years from now, make this process a little bit more smooth and a little bit more doable for our election workers, because we're putting people in very difficult positions in terms of the workload that has to be done. But great appreciation for our clerk, all the staff who helped out on Election Day to make that successful. Thank you.
I think I have some ideas around that, and you might not like them all. So I think there may be to be types of holidays and things around the days if we're going to approach the general in 2024. A real slow work day prior to that. City Attorney's report.
I have nothing to report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Consent agenda.
Thank you, Mayor. We have the following items on the consent agenda for council's consideration. Item 3.1, approve the resolution of support of the State High Water Infrastructure Grant Program. Item 3.2, approve ordinance number 1518 to modify the requirements for membership on the Historic District Commission. Item 3.3, approve adoption of the 2022 City Manager Performance Evaluation. Those are all the items on the consent agenda for council's consideration.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Next up, item 5.1, discussion of appointing a candidate for a potential city council vacancy.
Start of a discussion. Obviously, we've done this several times in the past couple of years with appointments to council. The city attorney can, of course, speak to any legal questions from council. A vacancy has to be filled within 30 days of the vacancy being created, is my understanding. So at this point, with council's direction or concurrence, perhaps we should, in December, put an application up. We can prepare the application that we had last time, or we can bring it back to council on December 5 for you to look at, and then solicit input through December, collect applications so that you have applications ready to go in January, because we obviously expect that there will be a vacancy with Councilmember Babcock being elected to the 54B District Court. So with that, just putting out there, if council wants to have a discussion in terms of any general direction to us about the application process, timing on that, I think that December likely would be a good time a little bit earlier, because with the holidays, people may not be focused on that. And then perhaps to get applications to council yet in December, so that come January, council, the remaining members of council can decide on what process you want to run, and then have a selection within the 30-day time limit.
Quite an egregious miss on failing to congratulate our colleague, Lisa Babcock, on her election victory and heading to 54B. Really excited for her in her absence today. And then we'll need I'm supposed to move as well.
We're supposed to move to excuse her.
Yeah, we'll do that after this. So yes, moving forward, that was kind of, I apologize for not acknowledging that.
I figured I'd do it when she was here to receive the praise. I like
We'll do it
to
again.
watch people get embarrassed when I say nice things about them. I think, I guess my only questions to Mr. Chubb were, you would think that after, this is my third time now, replacing fellow council members on this board, that I would remember how we do it, but we are allowed to post the application before the vacancy. I mean, we know that she will be leaving in January to fulfill her judgeship.
Yeah, I
So
don't-
anticipating a vacancy is okay, we can post an application before she's actually left?
Yeah, I don't see any concern about that, and it's not really spoken to in the charter, so I don't see an issue.
Okay, because that 30-day timeline is quite tight. It would be very nice if we could have some applications kind of vetted, and maybe each person could select their top choices to kind of move it forward a little bit. Could you just send the previous application to council so we can review it before the next meeting?
I can also bring the application and potentially a timeline for council to the December 5 meeting, so council can give specific direction at that point, but I can certainly share it with you now. I think it's actually still available on our website, the old one, so
probably is, yeah.
I can do that if council would like to speed it along, and then you can certainly make changes or change dates at that point on December 5.
If I'm remembering correctly, it was kind of just sort of like a resume, like, qualifications and then a few. It's pretty clear and
Correct.
wasn't a lot of,
We'd probably have to change the date,
yes.
so.
All I wanted this term was to not have to do this again, but I do not begrudge Ms. Babcock her judgeship, but oh well.
Well, this gets complicated because of the holidays. And the 30-day, I've dealt with that 30-day window before in the school board, and so I'm in favor of us getting the announcement out as quickly as possible with a deadline for the applications in December. Because my attitude is, in a perfect world, if we had somebody, when's the first meeting in January?
10th? January 10th from the gallery.
So, I mean, in a perfect world, I'd like to have us decide who it is on January 10th and seat that person, because, we're going to be pretty spotty through the holidays. So I don't know, I defer to you guys. You've gone through it before. I went through it once before. I think I finished 11th out of 12th applicants. But in any event, I'm wondering if we could circulate the application, and then within a certain time period or something, we could weigh in with you in terms of any changes or no changes. I don't think we have to vote on that application, do we, Mr. City Attorney?
No, I don't believe so.
And so maybe, we can all sort of eyeball that right away and then decide how quick. My attitude is we ought to post it right away, as soon as we can. And then pick the deadline sometime in probably mid-December or something, so.
I think that the only thing that would bring it back to council is if one member had a strong opinion that something should be changed, which I suspect probably won't happen, but.
And then you can also, in the past, council has set interviews. You could set interviews for a fewer number, a small number, a large number of people, or council could certainly make a decision just from the paper application. It's up to council at that point. But that might be a consideration for early January if council did want to do interviews, is to think about a special meeting, which we could certainly call and convene on the night other than a Tuesday night, for council to do a brief number of interviews. Maybe on the 10th, you look at applications, decide if you want to interview, select a small number of people or any number, and we set a special meeting for the following week where you could interview and appoint at the same meeting. So those would be two different ways you could do it, but there isn't a requirement for interviews. It's just what council has done in the past. You could certainly just do a paper application review and make the decisions if council reaches a consensus. So But I'm fine with going forward with the post, share the application and go forward with the posting and put a date like mid-December for acceptance, and it would say anticipated vacancy because there isn't a vacancy yet. It would say anticipated vacancy in council and until there's a vacancy, right?
Yeah, and that's one thing I was going to note is, so section 3.5 of the charter allows a council person, which she's not here tonight, so we'll have to pass it on to her, but to provide the resignation with the effective date, and then our 30-day window begins on the effective date. So if it's submitted earlier, it could provide us a little bit of clarity in the process.
So we don't have the 30-day mark right now?
I think it's pretty clear that she's sworn in on January 1.
I believe that's accurate.
So that would be the start of the 30, unless, yeah,
So January 30th?
yep.
January 30th?
That's my, I'd have to,
Okay.
yes, that would be the
Presuming
day after.
she
Yeah.
waited until the last day.
Yes.
Okay. I'm kind of leaning towards applications could be closed on January 6th because that's typically when our meeting agenda goes up anyway. And I think it's fair, like, if we close it around the 15th in December, I might be celebrating stuff and other people might be, and then may as well just give people that time. Like, I'm not going to be looking at applications like on December 31st or anything like that.
I think we also want a period of time before we put them to an agenda. I think we have to do a process to verify that they're eligible to be appointed. Would we want to do that at that point, probably before the applications get to council, and be able to compile them, because the charter has certain requirements for appointment? So it might give us time to do that process through the clerk's office, at least a couple of days in advance.
Okay. What about then January 4th? That's a Wednesday.
So I guess where we're at is you're going to circulate this application, and our next meeting in December, we're going to decide on the timing and framework.
And I won't post it at this point until then, at this point, because we're having discussion about that. Okay.
Item 5.2, discussion of response and next steps related to city requests for housing proposal at the 27-acre city-owned property at Coleman Road and West Road.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Tom Fehrenbach, the Director of Planning, Building, and Development, and I'm here tonight with the results of an RFP that was released earlier this year regarding the 27-acre property at Coleman and West owned by the city. And I have to start with an apology because I was remiss in adding this to the agenda appropriately. I missed a step, and so I think we're going to try to email it to you, and I'm going to go through the presentation, and then as soon as the meeting is closed out, we'll post it to the agenda for the public. So apologies about that. But a brief history here. So in October of 21, staff and our consulting team completed the housing market study. Some of the key takeaways were related to our significant housing attainability problem. Buyers and renters want prices at or below market rate, and we do not have the supply for those folks. We really need to address increasing diversity and equity through attainably priced housing, and also some other takeaways such as new renters prefer attached units, that there's a higher demand than supply of such attached units. And also on the supply side, that there's significant market potential for attracting singles and young professionals across all income brackets. So that led us to our housing near-term action plan, which created some goals for the city that we're working through currently. Some of the high-level goals were to review the northern tier area of the city, and specifically our future land use map, and to revisit the areas that are largely really in the master plan envision for commercial uses and determine whether housing would be appropriate. Further, we also created a goal of really trying to address the attainability gaps by finding creative ways through partnerships to create more attainably priced housing. As you will likely recall, through the period of February through April of '22, we had a number of conversations at the council and at the Planning Commission related to this property and related to the housing lens. In May, there was consensus, certainly from the Planning Commission, that housing may be appropriate in the area and should be focused on missing middle gaps. Also in May, we had a conversation where the council was interested in moving forward with marketing the property that we own at Coleman and West for housing, especially housing to address the attainability and missing middle gaps. In June, the Planning Commission continued their work, and they've started the effort of updating the 2023 master plan through a housing lens specifically, and looking at the future land use map through that lens. They further are planning to be informed by sort of the outcome of this effort in terms of looking at the broader northern tier and what they can learn from kind of this response from the market that we'll talk about today. In July, we released the RFP. The main thrust of the RFP was the focus on significantly addressing housing attainability gaps, but also balancing that with an economically viable project. We sought conceptual plans with analysis from the developers to indicate the feasibility and the likelihood of success, especially with alignment with the city's stated goals, and including cost estimates and other important factors. We asked them to include a mix of unit types and price points to create new opportunities for housing access for a broad range of renters and owners, and to include examples to highlight previous experience and their financial capability and other important aspects. As of September 30th, when the responses were due, we did receive 3 responses, one from Crimson and Partners, one from PK Companies and Partners, and one from Watson and Watson and Partners. To begin, the Crimson proposal, the summary of which is 34 different buildings. There are 9 multifamily apartment buildings, 14 townhomes, and 11 stacked townhouses as part of their concept, a total of 316 units, all within the range of 55 to 120% of average or area median income, a mix of units between 1 and 3 bedrooms, and a total of about 350,000 square feet. You can see the site plan here in its conceptual phase. And ultimately, several different types of units. Again, the 3-story multifamily with 1 and 2 bedroom units, the 2-bedroom ranches, the 2-bedroom stacked houses, the 2 to 3 bedroom stacked townhouses, and a community room. A breakdown of the unit and sort of how they reached the mostly under 80% AMI is included in their proposal. It was a very strong proposal in terms of its depth, in terms of its alignment with our requests. Ultimately, it anticipates a $76 million total investment. They did provide a very detailed budget and pro forma, which indicate a very broad understanding and on-the-ground knowledge related to housing development in this area. They have broad experience and local project experience, as well as strong relationships. Ultimately, the budget does identify a gap, mostly in terms of site preparation and infrastructure and utilities. And so although they are offering the full appraised price of $2.8 million, They are introducing this concept of the use of brownfield tax increment revenue financing, possible on the property through a partnership with the state land bank. It would be a $3.7 million request plus interest totaling just over $5 million, which as their estimates indicate would take about 13 years to pay off on local-only mills. And of course, I've lost my place. Excuse me just a second. So as stated, this was a very strong proposal. Staff certainly thinks it's the strongest of the proposals in terms of its likelihood for success and in terms of meeting a significant attainability gap for the city of East Lansing. Certainly, it will not solve all of our problems that are illuminated in the housing study and really tried to put into action in the near-term action plan. However, based on the strength of this proposal, it is our recommendation that we move forward with the Crimson proposal in terms of evaluating next steps. We see that as potentially directing staff to negotiate sort of the main deal points, and if they can be reached, to return to council for a consideration of a pre-development agreement. It would include aspects such as the sales price, details related to the rezoning, the brownfield plan, the site plan itself. We have many questions, especially related to how to control over time for prices, how to maintain the accessibility, especially for folks of low to moderate income, and then also many of the key aspects of the development agreement, such as the utilities, the infrastructure, installation and maintenance, and ultimately how we guarantee their performance if agreed to. So that is our recommendation in terms of moving forward. I just wanted to briefly touch on the other proposals we did receive. Be happy to talk further. PK's was a very strong proposal as well. It includes approximately 310,000 square feet across 30 different buildings with 344 units. This would be a 4-phase project with an LMI component, a missing middle component, and a market rate component as well. Of course, sorry. I'm losing my place again. In terms of some of the things to consider, and I think some of what makes this not as strong a proposal as the Crimson is the complexity related to those phases, is a significant gap of $15 million, which would need a significant amount of staff involvement, partnership, and frankly, uncertainty in terms of reaching that gap. And it would clearly take a significant investment of dollars as well from the city to make the project feasible. Lastly, the Watson & Watson proposal, which had some very interesting elements. It included the idea of for sale tiny smart homes, 200 of them, 192 efficiency units, a great amount of retail and clubhouse, and also a co-working space. They introduced the concept of a waste-to-energy facility on site, as well as on-site food production. Ultimately, this proposal, although interesting, is highly conceptual, and it has a broad magnitude of scope, which would need a great deal of further analysis and study to determine its feasibility. There was no detailed financial analysis of the project created, so we don't know, what the size of the perceived gap would be. I can guess that it would be quite significant, especially with our knowledge of waste-to-energy facilities, but ultimately no details on the wetland conversion to a lake, and then the proposal lacks some of the basics that we requested in terms of our request for proposal. So really, with that, the key policy questions for council is, one, should we move forward to begin negotiations with Crimson and return to council with a high-level pre-development agreement if it can be reached? And if so, are there additional council priorities that should be part of staff's consideration? Or should we pursue any other development proposals or seek new proposals? And that is really the basis of our conversation tonight. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I have some staff here as well that can go into some of the details if you'd like. And thank you.
I'll kind of set the parameters. I think with the significance and permanence and obviously the conversations had around this, I'd really like the whole of council to be here before we even decide what we're going to do next steps. But I'm happy to have the discussion, but I don't want to force multiple discussions with one member absent. I think it's too important if that can be.
I do have a question. So I'm looking at their pro forma revenue and construction breakdown, and I'm looking at the monthly rent on the 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom standard unit is around $1,100. And that's listed at 70% of AMI. So I guess that just made me wonder, what is our area median income? Because that still seems quite high in terms of a monthly rent.
So I'm looking at the Clinton County income and rent limits from MISTA, which is where those are established for our state and ultimately the county. 80% AMI for one person is $49,600. 60% is $37,200. In terms of rent per person, that equates to an 80% AMI rent of $1,240 a month.
Okay.
And $930 for 60%. So the 1167 is pretty
Right.
close to 70.
I guess it's been a while since I rented an apartment. I guess that doesn't seem out of range of what I would expect that AMI to be. It just seems high to me because I guess the last apartment I rented was maybe in college, and that was pretty cheap compared to that. So.
I would point out, as I mentioned, this does not solve all of our problems.
Right.
And I think that when we're looking on the lower end of AMI to the lower income folks, that is, we're really looking at a different type of development, something closer to what PK had envisioned in terms of their low income portion of the concept, where you're looking at 30 to 60%, and really the tools that exist for that right now are LIHTC, low income housing tax credits, and the 9% credits are very competitive. I'm not sure that a project of this size would be able to be financed, frankly. And I think that more likely we're as a city able to achieve that type of goal through what we're working through with the Parcel C discussions, which are continuing very regularly. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to come back to council with a program for that, bringing that LMI project to fruition in the near term.
Just for clarification, so the concept here with your recommended entrepreneur is, these are all rentals?
Correct.
Okay.
Councilperson Watson.
So this is a joint project?
So there's a partnership team that's established between the developer, a builder, and an architecture engineering firm, and a brownfield/financial consultant.
Does anyone have more skin in the game than the other? Who might be most likely to drop out?
I think that from the staff's review, the one that has the most likelihood of success and has put the most kind of bandwidth behind the analysis of how best to move forward would be Crimson. So I guess that is my way of saying that it's all we think that Crimson has the best chance and therefore the least chance of walking away, although there are many details that need to be ironed out prior to any recommendation for moving ahead with an actual project. this juncture would really be to decide whether you want to move forward with negotiating with Crimson, or again, taking some other course of action, which it could include talking to some others or all, or starting over.
Is there a way to not land in the same spot as Building C, where, like, is there a way where we can ask for their building to, maybe the first people are the low to moderate income people, or something like that, where we don't wind up where the back out is happening when it's time to build what we're looking for?
Yeah, so certainly the council has broad discretion to negotiate the development agreement, and obviously the developer has the ability to negotiate from their perspective as well. In terms of, the Park District project, it's a little bit of a different animal in the sense that, the developer was trying to reach a 25%, diversified housing goal as part of our ordinances, and they negotiated that 25% being put into phase 2. In this respect, the developer's indicating that a broad range of the apartments are going to be marketed at below 80% of AMI, and so the question is how ultimately we control for that, what assurances we have, and what kind of legal ramifications we have for whether they meet those standards or not. But I do think that, based on the fact that they need to partner with the land bank, and they need to have some agreement with the state in place related to the AMI pricing, that there will be significant levers that are available for us to hold them to that. But again, the proof will be in the details that we need to negotiate as part of this process if we move forward.
The comparison with our parcel C just sort of made me think of this. As this is envisioned, there's not like the lower rent places are mixed in. I mean, it's all it's jumbled together. It's not like there's a separate building that is the moderate income building. It's all together.
That's correct.
Okay.
Basically the way the developer sees it is the entire development is in the missing middle between 55 and 120% of AMI. If you look deeply at the numbers, you'll see that most of the units are under 80%. And that they posit is a function of the way that they're able to, market the market that exists, the way they're able to capture that, and apparently have found success in a very similar project in a neighboring community.
Aren't students also in that classification of the income classification?
In terms of students'
Income.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question
Sure.
for me?
Aren't students typically in the same income classification you're talking about as the target audience for this location?
Typically, students have very low income, so they're far below the 80% threshold. I think the real market that they're trying to get at, according to their documentations and conversations, has to do with the missing middle in terms of workforce, in terms of families of low to moderate income, seniors, folks that are starting their careers here locally, et cetera.
So walk me through that, will you please? So there are income requirements sort of opposite what we've talked about before. The income requirement here is you have to be making a certain level of income higher than lower income to qualify for these units?
Not quite. So the market sets the price of the apartment units based on the area median income and a reduction, so less than 80%, for instance. there is no qualification on the actual renters. They can be anyone. However, the way that these properties are marketed and the design of these properties and the types of amenities that are available to these for these properties and the location of this property tends to suggest that that it would be, hitting the missing middle, of which we are intending to do.
Well, I guess my question's more direct than, no offense to our students who actually finance almost everything we do in this town, but so how does this not become a student rental area?
I think there's some things that we can do in terms of the conditions of approval and the development agreement that can help assure that it's available to folks that are not just students. Things like when during the year it's marketed, not having all the leases be in August, for instance. Things like whether or not we can, ensure that the person whose finances are on the line are also the people that are living in the units. I think there's a number of, things that we can look at in terms of that.
That are legal?
I mean, obviously they have to be legal.
Okay.
Do we know like how the other places are doing, like on Chandler Road and the buildings by Jimmy's, by the storage units and
In
stuff like
Bath
that?
Township?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar distinctively with how they're doing, but I'm sure that our housing administrator, could help ascertain some of that information.
So we'll get that next time.
I will try.
Thank you.
If they will share it with us.
And I was also wondering, and I don't know if this is easy or hard to, gauge, but City of East Lansing employees, what percentage of them could afford to live in this area?
So we've looked at our average salary, and our average salary falls for regular people, regular full-time employees, not contingent or seasonal. They're not averaged in, but our regular full-time employees fall in the range of mid-60s to $65,000 to $68,000, I believe, the last time we checked. So well above the $49,000 that the 80% is marked off of. So it would appear to work well for city employees if they were interested.
But that would be your like mid-level are included and your,
It's an average.
people that have been there. And so what about like the young professionals and the singles that this place is seeking? Like,
The city does not have many positions that don't pay between 45 and 55 would be some of the lowest paid regular full-time positions we have.
okay.
So I would expect that 65,000 is probably also what would it be, a mean, but also a median income as well. So a middle score as well amongst all of our rankings. So I think it's a pretty good number, the mid-60s.
Okay.
So do you want us to come back in December 6th?
Yeah, let's put it back on the December 6th.
Okay.
Things we can have full input, and it'll also give the public time. That's where most of the smart people are, so we'll get a ton of input between now and the 6th, so.
So I do have, since you'll be coming back in December, I do have some questions about the brownfield part. So you mentioned that would be with the participation of the land bank, and that would be the Clinton County Land Bank, or Ingham County? Where does this fall on the county line?
I believe it's in Clinton County.
Okay. So that would not, I guess, I don't know what that means with the collaboration of the land bank. Like, is it their brownfield or is it our brownfield, or how does, like?
So as I understand it, and I don't have an in-depth knowledge of this particular mechanism, but as I understand it, the state legislation allows for brownfield TIF to be accessed through a brownfield plan if there's an agreement in place with this I'm sorry, it's the state land bank, so it's not.
Oh, it's the state land bank, okay.
It doesn't have to do with the county. But if there's an agreement in place with the state land bank and certain mechanisms, I believe it would be the developers who would put forward the brownfield plan through this mechanism with a partnership with the land bank. And there's certain things that they need to agree to with the land bank specific to the missing middle housing. And so even though the site is not contaminated, this is basically a mechanism to access the brownfield program through the state legislation.
Okay, and then the taxes that would be diverted are state taxes or their local taxes?
It would be, in their concept, it's a local only plan.
Okay.
And so
But the state gets to sign off on it?
I don't believe, well, the state land bank would have to sign off on their piece of it.
Okay.
And the state would have to sign off on the brownfield plan as a local only. It would need to go through the typical process to ultimately to the state treasurer, but it would not involve the Michigan Strategic Fund Board.
Okay, and then did I miss in here what the percentage of that capture would be?
They're showing 100% capture for a period of 13 years.
Okay.
But again, as noted in the plans, they're also offering the fully appraised value, of course, with some caveats that they want to reappraise it, and so we'll have to talk through those. But I think one thing we could do if we wanted to shorten the duration of the plan would be to negotiate a lower purchase price. So take less money for the property up front, but have the benefit of the property coming back on the tax rolls to the taxing
Sooner.
jurisdictions sooner and
Okay.
less interest as well.
That seems like details that are too precise to talk about at this point, so, but thank you for
Yep.
explaining the land bank.
No problem.
participation.
We'll bring this back on December 6th, and then we'll hopefully have a decision in terms of which direction you'd like us to move, and obviously we're here to take any additional questions that you have in the meantime.
Thank you. Next up, item 5.3, discussion of accessory dwelling units, policy initiative.
Good evening. So I'm Peter Menser. I'm the planning and zoning administrator for the city. So another topic on housing, and this is timely given kind of the background that Director Fehrenbach just provided. Just get situated here. Okay, so there's a presentation in your meeting packet and just a brief document that I called the Draft Ordinance Overview. So the topic is accessory dwelling units. I think everybody knows, but if not, they kind of manifest in a couple different ways. They are additional dwelling units on a property. The term I first heard was granny flats. So it's like they come in different ways. So it could be an addition to a house, it could be the renovation of an area inside of a house, or it could be the construction of a new detached building on the property, typically in a rear yard, that provides another place for someone to live on a property. So on the heels of oh good, we're going strong here. Let's go to slide 2, please. So a lot of what Director Fehrenbach just talked about, I'm echoing here. So this was identified, ADUs were identified as a strategy in the Housing Strategic Plan, and all of that came out of the Residential Target Market Analysis. This is also part of the Near-Term Housing Action Plan. I mean, really what that document did, it outlined the housing goals and strategies of the city to increase, encourage, and diversify housing in the city, and with the specific goal to review and make recommendations to amend existing zoning ordinances and policies to allow for construction of ADUs. So that's kind of the background about why I'm here and the background in this initiative. Also, the master plan talks about increasing the supply of diverse housing to accommodate the needs of all current and future residents. So I think between the groundwork that Director Fehrenbach laid and a little bit of background on the document, that explains kind of how we got to now. Next slide, please. So why accessory dwelling units? Why is this important? How does it help the issues that the city is currently grappling with in terms of attainability? So it's one tool of multiple that could tackle attainability, but also diversity housing issues in East Lansing, but it's specifically the diverse housing types and sizes. So I think if anyone's heard me talk about this topic before, we have a lot of single-family homes, we have a lot of multifamily apartment complexes, and we have a lot of missing part in the middle. We have those extremes here in the city. But also ADUs, they address changing family needs in smaller households. Obviously, life happens. A lot of things happen in people's families over time. Obviously, we all age, and we have different needs at those times in terms of housing. This ADUs provide affordable options due to kind of the efficiencies of the existing housing stock. You're not building a brand new structure. You're taking advantage of a lot that exists already, and there are some kind of infrastructure efficiencies there that can happen. It also facilitates aging in place. I don't mean, it's not, the granny flat is not a sarcastic term. It's a place that people in your family are, and I've heard a lot of calls over, just in my short amount of time here that people want to find a way to do this. It could be the addition over the garage. It could be the small detached structure in the backyard. There's a lot of us probably have a family member that could benefit from something like this. And finally, really this topic in general, they provide a broader range of housing in an area where a person might not be able to afford. It could be that foot in the door to a neighborhood that they wouldn't be able to afford the entire home, but might be able to be in an ADU. Next slide, please. So I and my team have been working on for the last couple of months, and we've worked with the Planning Commission with some initial feedback in kind of drafting an ordinance that would enable us to allow ADUs in the city of East Lansing, with a lot of caveats. So what did we do? We've looked at ordinances in other communities. We've identified best practices from around the country. I went to a couple webinars. There are several organizations that provide a lot of kind of model ordinances, AARP being one of the best. And certainly there is no one-size-fits-all approach, but there are a lot of policy themes that you see in some of the most successful communities that have ADUs. And also kind of, and this is my personal take on policy, is we have a desire to keep the regulations simple and straightforward. And the overall intent to make ADUs easy, and if this is a direction we want to go in, to encourage the adoption of, just make this easy for people to use. Next slide, please. So what you don't have in front of you tonight is the draft ordinance. This was really intended to be a higher level policy discussion and to talk about direction, and then we can put more efforts into finalizing a draft to share with you. But the key provisions, I'm going to go over these over the next couple slides of what is in this what is in this ordinance now, and then what may you want to see, or maybe what you don't want to see. So what we've got so far is allowing ADUs in single-family zoned, owner-occupied parcels in the city. So that's our R1, R2, R3s, all the Rs. Locating them in side or rear yard, so and then 5 feet off the lot lines. One of the two units on a lot must be owner-occupied. This is a common trait in some of the more successful ordinances. So that could be the homeowner lives in the ADU, or the homeowner lives in the primary dwelling. The owner is present on the site. Then regarding rentals, ADUs may be rented, but not in the rental restriction overlay district. So, and I'll show you a map in a second that kind of shows how broad those rental overlay districts reach. In those areas, you cannot rent units. There is very limited rentals allowed, but you would be able to. You don't have to have a rental license to have a family member living in an ADU. So an ADU could still happen in one of the rental restriction overlay districts, but it would be limited to family. On the screen, I know this is hard to read and it's a complicated map, but if you get a chance later to zoom in, take a look at this map. What it's showing, what you're seeing is there are areas, there's black, green, and red. They're outlined with white in the middle. Those are our rental overlay districts, and they're kind of in the central part of town there. And what you're also seeing are the parcels that are in color. So the parcels that have been filled in with a color. There's some blue there south of Lake Lansing Road and some other areas. Those would be the parcels, the ones that have color would be the ones that are eligible. Kind of if we implemented this tomorrow, those are the properties that would be eligible to have ADUs. So those are single family zoning, owner occupied properties. What you're not seeing here are rentals. The next slide, please. Let's continue with the key provisions. The draft ordinance suggests ADUs between 800 and 1,200 square feet, and that's based on the lot size of the parcel. It also proposes an increase in building and lot coverage by 15% to accommodate ADUs. So right now the city has a 25% building coverage standard and 40% ground coverage, or kind of lot coverage. It's everything else. So the buildings limits the building coverage. The ground coverage limits basically every other impervious surface, including the buildings on the lot. So this would boost that by 15% to allow for the construction of ADUs. The maximum height would be no taller than the primary dwelling, and certainly no taller than whatever will be allowed in the zoning district. In this case, all the Rs are limited to 30 feet or 2.5 stories. And then finally, this is an interesting provision. I would suggest including a deed restriction that would prohibit ADUs from being sold separately and from lots being subdivided to have the ADU on a separate lot. I've seen that in a lot of ordinances, and it seems like it might be relevant here. So really what here tonight I wanted to provide, like I said, an overview on this policy initiative, but I have a couple direct questions for council, and that's, is an ADU ordinance a council policy priority? Do the key provisions of this draft ordinance, which I know we went over quickly, match generally council's vision for how this initiative might go? And then are there any other policies or issues that I haven't said tonight that you think might need to be included in, considered by staff and included possibly in a future draft ordinance? And certainly I'm an expert, I'm getting to be more an expert on this topic, so I'll do my best to field questions for you, and anything else I may have to come back in a future meeting.
Questions?
Well, where did this come from? I mean, these concepts, I assume you looked at some, I mean, I think you already said this, but I assume all over the country these ordinances are starting to get passed.
Yeah.
So I assume staff's looked at some, I mean, is there some model ordinance like we have in the law? Or
yeah, I mean, I've looked at ordinances from all over the country. The model that I found the most effective, or the best that translate here. I mean, anytime I look at a policy, I try to kind of pluck the best pieces from different communities with varying success. But I think generally the AARP model ordinance, I frankly stole a lot of those provisions to include in this draft.
Well, so I guess my answer to your questions is I don't know, and I guess I'd appreciate seeing some of the data that you looked at to sort of come up with these concepts. I mean, I don't know.
May I ask what types of data?
Yeah, I want to see the ordinances that you thought were good. I want to see the AARP model ordinance. I'm assuming there's some urban planning articles that have been out there in the last 2 years. I mean, I'm conscious of the fact City of Los Angeles has looked at this. I think Portland, Oregon's looked at it. I mean, places all over the country have looked at it. So there's got to be a compendium of knowledge on this stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
And no offense to you, but I guess I'd just like to see some of that.
No, understood. Yep. No, I mean that's good to vet this. So I can put together some of the documents that I've been looking at, and they'll probably tell the story better than I'm doing now.
And then the only other question I had is on number 3. I think you're saying two different things. You're saying sometimes you do need a rental license and sometimes you don't. You said the process for an ADU requires a building permit, a rental license, a certificate of occupancy, and no special use permit is required. But didn't you say there was an exception on the rental license if it was a member of the family?
Yeah. So if the ADU would be in a rental restriction overlay district, you do not need a rental license to have a family live. So if I lived in one of those districts, I could build an ADU, but the person that occupies the ADU would have to be a member of my family.
Well, how do you
and you would not need a rental license to do that.
How do you define a member of my family?
Actually, our ordinance defines family.
Well, maybe.
No,
I don't think it defines within certain degrees of consanguinity or whatever the word is. Council will correct me.
It does.
Like my third cousin from southern Indiana?
No.
Okay,
we have a pretty liberal definition, but it's also pretty standard in terms of who it includes.
It's pretty standard because it comes from a Michigan Supreme Court case on the city of Ann Arbor. So what I'm suggesting to you is that definition came out of some very explicit things in the state of Michigan, and I'm suggesting to you that the concept of family in these situations is broader. So I don't know, but
We'll look hard at that.
is there another Michigan city or town that's adopted one of these ordinances?
Ann Arbor's probably the easiest reference. They've gone through, and I like to use them as an example because they've been doing this for a while, and they did it once, and they went back and changed the ordinance to open it up. They actually started with just owner occupied and eventually started allowing also rental units. Now, when we visited the city of Ann Arbor earlier this year, they don't have a lot of units yet, but they're certainly trying. If I might, our zoning ordinance at least defines a family as husband, wife, son, daughter, father, mother, brother, sister, grandfather, grandmother, grandson, granddaughter, aunt, uncle, stepchildren, legally adopted children, or any combination of those folks. And I mean, we'll look hard at that certainly if this proceeds, but that's our definition in zoning.
So a significant other is not family, correct?
Under this, I would say no, but I would want to look into that. We would call it domestic unit. Well, your point is well taken. I'll take a look at that and get back and follow up.
Are there, well, I guess kind of what's looming obviously is actions by the state which would define what an overlay district is or even nullify what an overlay is. Wouldn't that render our local rules moot if we had multiples of these types of units built?
Are you talking about the short-term rental? Yeah, that's definitely a complicating factor, and that hasn't resolved yet. The way I understand it, would limit this local control basically over units that are of 30 days or less for rentals. I don't have a good answer on that one yet, but it's definitely a complicating factor.
Ooh, I guess that does answer. I was going to say I am basically wildly in favor of this. I think that denser urban occupation is a pretty high priority for me in terms of environmental stewardship. The more people you can fit in a smaller area, the more green space you can preserve outside of that area, right? So, and I think the provision of having one of the units be owner occupied speaks to a lot of the concerns that would come up, in terms of people who are renting, an income property and then want to build another income property on their property and then get, more coverage and more cars and all of that sort of stuff. But, I know several people who have children who will not be able to be independent in adulthood, who they would like to have live close. I know multiple people in town who either have a parent living with them or are trying to figure out how to accommodate having a parent living with them. I could imagine moving my college-aged child into their own dwelling unit if I didn't want to rent an apartment for them. So I think that there's a lot of uses for it outside of just the income property, but bringing the short-term rental into the conversation does open up that question of people basically popping up a shed quarters in the backyard and then renting it out Airbnb, which I know it would not be possible now, but would theoretically be possible if that passed, and I think that's a concern that we might want to speak to.
Yeah, I will put some more time into that and come back to you with a better answer.
Yeah, but otherwise, I mean, the concerns that I would have, which would be, increasing density of income properties, primarily is taken care of by the having one owner occupied.
Thank you.
I'll just put it out there. Parking.
Yeah, parking.
Councilperson Watson?
Have the Council for Neighborhood Presidents talked about it, or?
I don't think so. I think this is the first time outside of the Planning Commission that.
So new. Nobody's talked about it yet.
Good. You want to talk about it
Well,
Monday?
I've been talking about it for a little bit, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were. It's exciting to me, and I was wondering, this opens the doors for people that aren't used to getting building permits and rental licenses. And so can you walk me through that process? Like I want to build a tiny house, and then it says I need to get a building permit. So what does that mean?
Well, I mean, generally what it means is, you've got to have, typically the way it will work for a building permit is someone, I know I couldn't do the work on my own. So typically it'll be a contractor that would get the building permit for someone. One possible way to address this is because it's not going to be something that everybody knows how to do. There are some communities, and I would need to look into this more, that actually would have like prefab plans on record at City Hall that have been essentially pre-approved by the building staff, and it's like, this is a structure that would work here in the city. I don't know how the fees or licensing would work like that, but for example, the Planning Commission chairperson Daniel Bowman worked recently on, I can follow up with council after this, on a document through, I thought it was MISTA or MEDC, MML, Michigan Municipal League, on ways that building departments, planning departments can have some of these prefab plans on hand to distribute to people to make that, to kind of bridge that gap, because there is going to be kind of an experience and knowledge gap there.
So Amazon sells tiny houses. And so if I bought a tiny house, how could I get a building permit without a contractor? If I had people that could build it, or if I thought I could build it, how does the building permit process work?
Well, generally, you would need to have a plan showing your property, the property boundaries. If this is a greenfield site, so if there's nothing else on it, really just a survey showing the property boundaries, any other kind of like utility easements or something like that. And then, the best way I've described it, or the building inspectors have described it to me, is you need to be able to demonstrate how you're going to build it. So what components are part of the pack? Maybe in this case it's a prepackaged item. Show the inspectors how it's going to be anchored into the ground, how everything's going to be connected. I'm speaking very, very generally.
And the certificate of occupancy, is that something difficult to get, or?
No, that's really kind of just the final check mark that you've done, that you've complied with the building code, that the residence is kind of livable. It's all the utilities, so it's it's like the last thing. It's gone through everybody. It's gone through planning, zoning, building, fire, engineering, utilities, and that's the final step.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great it's a great idea. I love tiny homes. I love the idea of a tiny home, but we should also have a way where the homeowner can do it just as they do for everything else, or other things on their property.
Now, we recognize that it can be challenging.
Do our codes support things like composting toilets that would have a sewage component that are not connected to a municipal sewer?
I don't know the answer to that, but could follow up.
If you wouldn't mind looking into that, I would be interested.
I thought no, and I'm getting a no from in back, so I would guess no, but we will look into it.
Okay. Because
It will also be connected to the sewer.
that would make a freestanding dwelling significantly easier without having to run under their sewer line. I think that would be the one of the big holdups of a homeowner being able to do something themselves.
I think what I heard per your initial questions, is it a priority? I think it's a curiosity. And then we'll look at kind of the legality and all the little touch points everyone's raised. I think there's enough here to look at it.
Okay.
And then obviously we'll continue. Yeah, let's move
I would
forward.
put my interest higher than curiosity.
Okay, I'm in curiosity.
What did you say, Mayor Pro Tem?
I would say my interest is higher than a curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
I
I'm with
I would-
Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, we can certainly find some answers to some of the questions and issues that have been raised tonight and follow up with you. I appreciate the time and the feedback.
Thank you. Next up, item 6.1, consideration of restaurant license late fees.
So this item is on the agenda at council members' request, so we can discuss it. I can answer questions as council sees fit.
I requested this be placed on the agenda, and let me just preface my comments by saying that there's no doubt that some of the individuals who might be subject to this gave me money for my council election last fall. And Mayor, I defer to you. I can either start explaining why I'm interested in this, or I can go ahead and make a motion. So we've got a potential motion on the floor for discussion purposes if it gets seconded.
Either or.
I move that the resolution approved by the City Council on June 21st, 2022 regarding business license and entertainment fees is hereby amended as follows. Number one, no such licensee shall be charged a, quote, past due, end quote, and/or, quote, penalty, end quote, fee if the requisite license application and required corresponding documents are filed on or before December 1st, 2022. Number two, any, quote, late fees, end quote, and/or, quote, penalty, end quote, fees previously assessed pursuant to the prior resolution shall be returned to the licensee. Number three, any licensee not completing the necessary license documentation and filing same with the city on or before December 1st, 2022 shall be assessed the usual and customary, quote, late fees, end quote, and/or, quote, penalty, end quote, fees. I guess if I can get a second, we can discuss it. If I can get a second, I guess we're done talking about it, so.
All right, do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion.
I wasn't here, it was during the time period I was ill, but Mr. Lan has kindly got me the documents from back in June, and look, this is, I guess, my basic feeling about this. I think the council was trying to do the right thing. I just think it's confusing. And so if you look back at the agenda item report from June 21st, 2022, in the second paragraph, it says, quote, if passed by council, the resolution will extend the due date for restaurant and entertainment license fees currently due on June 30th, 2022 to December 1st, 2022. Further, it will extend the length of time for the late fee to be charged from 15 days to 30 days. Therefore, for businesses that timely file their license by June 30, the license will be issued with no fees due until December 1st, 2022. And then if you actually look at the resolution, it to me is also confusing. So I think what happened here is it was nobody's fault, but there was some miscommunication with these licensed facilities in terms of when do you have to file your actual documents as opposed to when do the penalty fees get incurred. And at least as I understand it, if you didn't file your documents by June 30th, then penalty fees were incurred when we sent the message that they didn't have to perfect their license, perfect's my word, they didn't have to perfect their licenses until December 1st. So I just think it was not very well communicated, and I think we ought to try to fix that.
Yeah, I'll lay out a kind of couple of my overriding opinion on this. I think in a way it's clear enough with kind of what we did for downtown businesses and all the fees and things that we got adjudicated and put aside and through that time period. I'm usually there for fairness, and there's oftentimes for the general public or anyone else, not an option if you miss the deadline to meet your fees, and particularly for this group that has its own commission, its own ability to communicate, its own ability to double check the provisions of its own rules. This was lazy, no matter how they want to look at it. They had a lot of opportunities to kind of work through it in their own ranks. We sit and talk with this commission if there was questions or concerns around this. It's overall lazy, and I did speak to kind of the spirit of the rule was to provide some relief moving into through the end of the year as people were beginning to staff up and get back to full capacity. Everyone is at full capacity, obviously, and moving forward from this point. This is my goal is not to set a precedent here. I want to try to match the language of the ordinance, and if the legal language was clear enough, I'll throw that to the city attorney that that's what the ordinance or what we resolved in that time. So I'd like to hear that based on what Councilperson Brookover said. Did we resolve that if you meet these parameters correctly, then this is the outcome, or is it legally confusing? You know what I'm asking?
As I recall, George might have to weigh in on this. So as I recall, the intent was that we were not going to give any extension on making sure that all the paperwork was in place, but of only the payment provisions. I think that it can be read that way, but I did see Councilman Brookover's motion, and it does look as though that would reverse the fees if those documents aren't in place prior to December 1, so long as they're in place by December 1. Is that the intention?
That was the intent, yeah.
Okay. And so that was my recollection, is just how it was previously written. We wanted to make sure that all their documents were in place to ensure that they were operating properly or in accordance with the ordinances.
So let me just go back to the I don't have the actual signed resolution from the mayor, but in the first paragraph, it says, the license fee due date extension is only for the business license fees and entertainment license fees due June 30th, 2022 to engage in business operations from July 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2023, and only for those businesses that timely file complete license applications and all required corresponding documents on or before June 30th, 2022. So here's what we did. We said, you got to file your you have an extension on these licenses until December 1st of 2022, and you don't have to pay anything until December 1st of 2022, but you got to file your paperwork by June 30th. So then if they don't file the paperwork by June 30th, even though they don't have to pay for them on June 30th, we impose a penalty. So we're imposing a penalty on something that they haven't even been required to pay for. So that's all. I don't think it's very fair, but whatever.
I was there for the discussion. I thought it was exceedingly clear that we wanted the paperwork and the application in. They were supposed to have their paperwork to show that they were a licensed business to operate in the city during that time. I think that's clear. It says you're supposed to have your complete license application, all required correspondence and documentation by that date of June 30th. So I think it was exceedingly clear during that meeting. It's written clearly. And if they misunderstood, I'm not sure how they could misunderstand that from that clear language. We wanted to make sure that the grease disposal and all the documentation was complete. You know, we recommended that the payment be made at the same time. Council wanted to give further relief, but it was clear from the discussion at the table that it was only relief of the payment and not of the paperwork. And I know you weren't there present for the meeting, but that was clear for the discussion, and I think it's clear from the language as well.
And with all due respect to you, and you were kind enough to give me the summary of the discussion, there was no specific discussion about the penalty on the stuff that you gave me. So I'm done, Mayor. I made my point.
Further discussion?
I just pulled up communication from Clerk Schuster that was sent to Council. I don't remember when this was sent, but she's got a spreadsheet here of all of the communication that was sent to every downtown business, and businesses that were not in compliance were sent communication on the 15th of June and also on the 24th of June as an email. So I mean, I don't know. And I do remember the discussion as being pretty specific about needing to have the licensing stuff in because of things like the grease disposal plan and things that couldn't be delayed.
It's too bad the resolution wasn't attached from June 21st so that I can read and follow the discussion. But what changes, what has to go backwards if this motion passes?
So we would have to return money that's been paid in late fees. If restaurants have paid late fees, we would have to go back and manually go into the system and rebill every single restaurant license individual, so not just each restaurant, but each license that each restaurant has, and rebill that. So Clerk Schuster gives me an estimate of probably 10 hours of staff work to do all of the license changes and rebilling, to undo that, and also send rebates or refunds to those businesses that paid. And the resolution was sent on, I emailed it to council on November 9, and it's at the end, there's a staff report at the start of it for 2 pages, and then there's a couple of page resolution after that. So it was November 9 for me,
Thank you.
sorry.
What if it was a credit of the late fees instead of returning the money? What if a credit was given for the next time around?
I don't think that changes staff time.
I don't think it changes staff time from that perspective, but we have to still go back and change all the billings and look who's paid and rebill. But
Further discussion?
Councilmember Brookover, you're interested in the businesses getting the refund, though, as
Well,
opposed?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought about building in a, what's the word you used, I'm sorry?
A credit?
Yeah,
Them
I
getting-
thought about building in a credit going forward.
Are we discussing today, or are we voting today?
Both. We're in the motion.
Oh, yeah, I forgot we did do the motion. So would you want to make an amendment to that?
Yeah, or you can make a friendly amendment, Ms. Watson, but I'd change it. Who seconded it? Dana?
Yeah, I seconded
Okay,
it.
if you'll allow me to.
Yes.
I would amend number 2 to say any late fees and/or penalty fees previously assessed pursuant to the prior resolution shall be
Can we say credited?
yeah, I'm going to. I just want to get there. Shall be credited to the licensee on any further amounts due.
So George, what does that change mean to you then?
I think it's essentially the same as giving a refund. I mean, we would just have to go back, and if they've paid, we would give them a credit on their next bill, and we would have to, people who haven't paid, we'd have to tell them we have to rebill them and tell them not to pay. So I don't think it changes the time of the work. It basically waives the fee and puts it as a credit
Do we cut checks for people?
all the time.
I would imagine that, the cutting check process takes longer than, I don't know, changing someone's account, but.
We cut many,
But
many,
I'm not in the
I think it's
office.
6 of one, half dozen the other. I don't think it matters either way.
Okay. All right.
I'm on one side of this issue, but it's begging the question on the other side of the issue. Is this system, if it's this labor intensive on the refund or on any other side, this seems primitive.
So it's because we changed it. We're making changes. So the system is set up for billing. It does it automatically, but then we put late fees in, and then we build them again, and we build them again, and we gave everyone notice, and then now we're changing it back again and billing them again. So we're just taking a process that's automated, more automated, and we're making it very manual.
I
think
get
that's
it.
probably what's happening.
So the front end is automated. To reverse it out would be manual.
You just got to do it. There's a lot of work to be done by hand to do it.
Yeah, that sounds fraught with error.
Yeah.
As I'm just trying to be on that side of it. It's the other side of the coin for me.
Yep.
That's exposing the clerk or anyone who has to do that type of work to just, so that if we had to refund all the fees, say the state rules changed, we had to go back through or something, that seems tedious, from that perspective, that our system works that way.
Mr. Lyhanis, do you have a figure for us as to how many how many establishments have actually been assessed late fees?
I don't have that figure.
Okay. Can you give me a guesstimate, more or less than 15?
No, I can't. I can get that for you, but I can't get it now. But I can get it for you.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Aye.
Motion fails. Do you have to restate that?
2-2, motion fails. Yeah, I'm kind of am where I am on this subject, kind of moving forward, but we have an even number, so I don't think any level of proposals, but this is also time sensitive. So for a way forward. I'll take suggestion.
What are we looking for on the next item?
Well, that was this motion, and we still have action on it.
No, the motion was amended. That was the vote on the amended motion.
This is the amended motion.
I mean, unless somebody wants to make another motion,
Yeah,
then we're on
unless-
to the next item on the agenda.
Yeah, we have a December 1 cutoff for this, correct? To make in, we won't have another chance at any action on this. All right. We have to move on then. Item 6.2, consideration of first phase document of art space and discussion of potential proceeding with the next phase.
I think, am I the contact person on this? Yes, okay.
Mhm.
So I think you'll see in your packet the feasibility study from the first phase of the art space, which we've never formally accepted. So I think that that's just a little kind of cleanup that we should kind of adopt that as, you know, in our records. And then further, there's the question of whether to proceed with the next phase, which would be an additional funding of, I think, $35,000, which our community member and steering committee member brought forth in public comment, which is that's essentially the marketing part of the art space preparation, I guess. And you'll also see letters of support from a wide variety of community members, including our state representative and senator. So I guess to make a motion to get this on the table would move acceptance of the initial report from ArtSpace, and then approval of the funding for the second phase.
Second. Discussion?
How much is the funding for the second phase?
It's $35,000.
Is that, where is that in our materials?
Oh, I don't know if it is in our materials. I think, Eleanor, can you, would you mind just confirming that I have the correct number for that? Oh, Mr. Fahrenbach, thank you.
You can find it on page 41 of 70 of the agenda item report. Step 2, Arts Market Study.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is, I think there's been some discussion through this process of why the city is shouldering some of these fees. So whenever there's a development proposed, the developer will go through all of these, and I mean, maybe not necessarily exactly this kind of a market study, but it's a confirmation for them that their project will work out. This is a project that we are a partner in just because it's coming into our community. And the developer that we are theoretically partnering with, if this goes to that point, is a nonprofit. And so part of their model is to have community buy-in on these projects. I think it's, many times I get interesting comments in my email about why doesn't the city do X, Y, Z? Why doesn't the city build a theater downtown? Why don't we have more bookstores? So in the general course of things, the answer to those things is because we're not a landlord and we're not a bookstore and we don't run theaters. We run sewers and other less glamorous things. So this is one time when we can say, let's see if it can work. So I think that it could work. I'm very excited about this process and this project. I've seen art space projects in other towns where I've lived. They become very vital community centers, exactly as has been presented here. The idea is to create kind of an art-focused corridor with anchored residences, community events, and I do think that something like that could be a great amenity and a great addition to our town. So for me, it's worth it to move on to the next market study phase.
Discussion?
I guess I would say, has there been any discussion about where the funding, or we envision it coming from? I think the DDA may have assisted the last portion of the study by splitting it with the city. Do you know, Mr. Fehrenbach?
It was the DDA as well as the Arts Commission and the city.
Mr. Fehrenbach, the Arts Commission money, did that come out of the Public Art Fund or did that come from the Cultural Arts Grants Fund?
I do not recall, but I think it was from the Public Art Fund.
Okay. We could certainly, go back to both of those bodies. I think there's been some discussion at the GDA of this. There seems to be enthusiasm in that group for this project still, unless something's changed in the last couple of weeks.
Could we go back in the interim and bring this back after finding if they'll support it so we can know what the obligation would be and come back in December for council's approval?
We could. I'd like something just a little firmer, I guess, going forward. Maybe we could commit to funding 20,000 of it and then make a motion to seek the balance of the funding from those two bodies. I would amend my motion for that if you would support that, Mr. Bacon.
I do. I'll second.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just generally speaking, I think opportunities to do art space and these types of things are really simple, easy multipliers when they're executed properly in the community, and they allow stuff we're talking about around retention and creativity and all that kind of thing to kind of organically take place. And when you don't have those spaces, you don't get those people who tend to kind of create that organic creativity. So I'm interested just from that. I think it's a simple investment. We'll see where the price tag goes and see if I'm still riding along. So, discussion?
Can you restate the motion, please?
Yep.
As amended.
Yep, I will do my best. So my motion was to accept the first phase document of Art Space and to fund $20,000 from the general fund to proceed with the second phase study and seek the balance of money that would be necessary from the DDA and the Arts Commission.
I suggest yet another friendly amendment.
Sure.
That we accept the study and that we commit to contributing at least $20,000 to the next phase, pending discussions with other possible contributors.
Sure, sounds great. I would happily accept that amendment.
this is going to be approximately 6 months. And then the step 3, do we start considering in our budgeting sessions where the next portion of the monies and huger amounts of monies is going to come from?
I think it would be good to do that, yes, to consider future phases if this is something that we want to see through to the end,
Okay.
so that we don't stall again like we did on this first phase.
Yeah.
Mayor Bacon, I don't know if you feel comfortable recognizing Eleanor for her contribution.
Yeah, take privilege, step up.
Part of the second phase. in
Can you
fact,
speak into the microphone, Eleanor? I'm sorry.
Part of the second phase, and a good deal of it actually, is concentrated on looking at the funding sources for the next phase, which would be the pre-development, the actual looking much more specifically at the site that may have been picked or the site that is arising from the study. So you have a much bigger look in the second phase at who will occupy the live-work studios. They're 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms, so it's also appeals to families. And it may be 40 to 50 lofts, something like that. That's what they said in the study was a possibility. But we'd be looking for public money in particular, which is what funds other art spaces in other cities.
Public money
So-
outside of the city of East Lansing.
Yeah, yes. We're talking about MISTA, we're talking about METC, Capital Housing Coalition, all kinds of funding sources like HUD and so on, as well as private sources. There's already one bank, Key Bank in Ohio, is interested in helping with art space here because they have worked with other art spaces in other cities and are familiar with it, so.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Great. Who's the staff lead on this? Is it Adam?
Adam and Mr. Fehrenbach have both been involved with different portions of this. I think this really started, the driving force behind this was actually the former chair of our DDA, Peter DeWan. And so I don't know if there is an internal staff liaison or if the steering committee has really kind of been the liaison.
Now I see Tom. So do you all look for grants sometimes? Like, is it possible to start looking for some grants for some of these dollars?
We're very regularly looking for grants. I think that if the council decides to move ahead and they're authorized to move forward with phase 2, we'd be working very closely with them in terms of trying to identify those buckets of money that are available.
Great.
Further discussion? George's face says something.
I'm ready to vote.
Oh, let's do it. Let's get out of here.
That's his, I want to go home face.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Meeting adjourned.